In our next video, we're going to be installing the power steering unit from Demon Powersports. It's a brushless power steering unit. They offer them for UTVs and ATVs. This installation is going to be on a 2018 Razor Turbo. You're going to notice in the video we've had the front fenders, everything's going to be off. It just makes it a lot easier to see what's going on with the installation. You don't have to take the entire front fenders and everything off in order to install it. It just makes for an easier to follow video. Of course, if you have any questions, be sure to message us with anything, any help, any tips, and if it's something I can't help you with, we'll get you headed in the right direction. There were a few times in the installation video when sound was an issue. Didn't realize it as we were doing it, but once we went back to edit, we noticed couldn't get it out. So if you have any questions about those parts, if it was hard to hear, just be sure to shoot us a message. So to start off, we're going to remove the cover. First thing we're going to do is take out these two bolts. It's a T27 Torx head. Close that really quick. The cover should fall right off for us. It's going to expose our power steering unit. From here, we're going to take the lower steering arm off. You can see mine may look a little different than yours. It's been modified to fit a different steering rack. You'll take the U-joint loose here at the power steering unit, also down your steering rack, and then as you take the unit apart, everything's going to pull right out. You're also going to want to go ahead and take the U-joints loose up here on the top of the power steering unit. Get those ready to take out as well. Just a quick view from down around where the gas pedal and brake pedal are. You can look up. You can see right here's the bolt that holds your U-joint on. It's going to be a 13 millimeter. You can also spin your steering wheel if you need to get it where you can get on both sides. That way you can hold it with a wrench and get that out of there. That'll have that shaft ready to pull out of the way. Now we've got that shaft loose. Slide it down over out of the way for right now. Now we can focus our attention on getting this upper shaft and the rest of our power steering unit removed. So I've got the bolt on top where the shaft goes into the power steering unit. We already took that loose using a 13 millimeter socket. Let's pull that tap off, take that bolt out. It's always a good idea to mark where your bolts come from. That way you don't get things mixed up in the reassembly process. On the top side, we're going to go ahead and remove the steering wheel. We have the quick disconnect steering wheel, so we're going to pull that off, toss it to the side. Then we're going to take our adapter off, which is where most of you guys, when you pull your steering wheel, you're not going to have the adapter. Everything's just going to come off all at once. You're going to use a 15/16 socket to get this nut off. Sometimes you got to work with it just a little bit, and the steering wheels can be a pain to come off. There's some other videos you can check out on how to get your steering wheel off if it was to be seized on there. Right, guys, we're still looking up from the bottom around the gas pedal and the brake pedal. You're going to see there's 3 bolts, one here, one right back up in here, and then one right here. And that's going to hold your power steering unit on. These are 15 millimeter bolts. I found the easiest way to do this, to be able to get to all 3, is just use a ratchet wrench. Get in there and get to them, zip them off in just a moment. So we've already got these broke loose. We're going to go ahead and pull those off, and then we'll start back from there. Right, this is the last bolt we have left holding our power steering unit on. Again, before you pull this and let everything kind of fall down, make sure you've got your clips removed from the top. On the wiring harness, there's 2 of those. One on either side of the steering stem on top. Once you get those 2 clips, make sure those 2 clips are loose. Go ahead and take this last bolt out. So we got our steering adapter off. We're going to come up under here. You'll see there's 2 bolts holding the steering unit on there that's got the tilt adjustment. The entire column will come off. And try to get in there. These bolts are going to go all the way through. There's just a good view. Those bolts go all the way through. They're a 15 millimeter bolt. We're going to pull both those out. We have, again, our steering wheels completely off. That's all ready to come apart before we pull these 2 bolts out. So just kind of wrap up where we're at right now. We pulled the steering wheel off. In our case, we had a quick disconnect steering wheel. Went ahead and pulled the adapter and the bushings out, everything we needed on this top side. On the bottom side, we pulled the lower steering arm off. We pulled it off our power steering unit and also off the steering rack. Now I had to pull my steering rack completely out, so if you can't get that completely off, you can leave it attached to the steering rack. Just make sure everything's loose. and when you pull this power steering unit up, it's going to come off with it. We've got the 2 plug-ins, both unplugged on our power steering unit. There's one up there, one back here on the back side. We've also got our bolt out and everything loose on our upper steering shaft. 3 bolts out of the power steering unit. Those are 15mm bolts. Remember, it's best to use a ratchet wrench to get those out. And then there are 2 bolts right up under here that hold the tilt steering unit on. We're going to pull that off as one piece in its entirety. Those are 2 15mm bolts. They go all the way through. And you can see the last one we have there is just barely sticking in, so we're going to pull that out. And this should get this tilt unit out. Tilt unit's out, upper arm's off, power steering unit is completely loose. Reach in, and that's our power steering unit, completely removed. Now we're ready to install that new unit from Demon Powersports. Get it in there. It's a brushless system. Going to be a great upgrade on our unit. So far, if you have any questions or anything, any comments, concerns, be sure and just post them down the bottom, and we'll get back to you. Thank you. So the first thing we're going to do to mount the Demon Powersports power steering unit is going to get our bracket assembled. This is the part of the bracket that's going to mount around your brake brake mount. There's 4 tabs. There are bolts that stick out through the firewall. It's going to mount here, and then this is the part that's going to mount to our actual power steering unit. To put those together, the piece that mounts the power steering unit is going to go under the part that mounts to the firewall. Once you get this together, use these bolts that come with the kit. Slide them up through the bottom. Just put them in loosely to start off with. You're going to need a 10mm and a 12mm ratchet and wrench for these. Just get them all in there hand tight. You'll notice they're slotted, so they're really easy to get these lined up, to get them in. Now that we got those started, turn it over. You can see everything's going to fit in here nice and flush around the edges. Once you get those in, again, you can tighten those down, 10mm and a 12mm. We'll go ahead and get ours tightened up. Then we'll go inside the cab of the Razor and show you how to mount this bracket onto the firewall. So now we're going to remove the upper steering shaft from our tilt unit. First thing you'll want to do, use a 10mm wrench and a hex key. Take the bolt out of your tilt adjuster. Slide that out. It's going to allow you enough room to tilt this back. Pull that steering shaft out and save your bushings. Lay this off to the side. We're going to put our new Demon Powersports shaft in. Reinstall the bushings. Slide this in. Right now's a great time to check the condition of your bearings for the upper steering shaft. Put this on. Everyone's in. Make sure that you get this over to the right side. If you put that way, it'll actually be facing towards your power steering unit. So in this case, it's going to come up towards me, which will put it towards the passenger side of the machine. We'll slide this back over. Get it back in place. Get the bolt back in. We're going to get this tightened back up good and tight. And then we've got this unit ready to install. One thing you're going to notice that's really nice about this is that there's actually a lot of adjustment down here. That way once you install it, you can slide it down onto your power steering unit and get it down there and seated properly without a lot of fighting and beating and banging. Cut that last part out. So we got the shaft in. I'm just going to go ahead and loosely place our steering quick disconnect on here. That way it just kind of holds everything together, and we'll get that tightened up more appropriately once we get it on. Now we're going to mount our power steering unit up to our mounting bracket. So the mounting bracket's going to be sitting like this in the machine. So our power steering unit's going to mount on the top, the flat side. It's pretty easy to get it on here. It'll only fit one way. Comes with the hardware supply to install it. You're going to need a 14mm wrench or socket to install these bolts. Go ahead and put these in right now hand tight, and then we'll snug them up before we put the bracket on the machine. The reason I'm putting this on beforehand is some of these bolts here in the back, once you have your brake assembly and things in, they're just a little bit tougher to get to, so this just makes the job a little bit simpler. So once we get these torqued down, we'll get them over, and then we'll show you how to mount the bracket. Same bracket that mounts these. 4 studs. Again, we've already got our power steering unit mounted to it, so we'll just slide it up here. Get our wires out of the way. Got everything up there into place. We'll go ahead and loosely start all 4 of these tabs. Alright, now we've got all those ready. We'll grab our impact, snug those up. And of course, every time you use an impact on anything, always go back and double check it by hand just to make sure that it's nice and tight. That's got our bracket installed with our power steering unit. Next, we're going to worry about getting the drive shafts, or the steering shafts installed, and our control box for it. Okay, so now we're going to mount our power steering controller. We're going to mount right here on the side of our steering frame. Set this out of the side for just a moment. Comes with a flat plate. See, it's got 2 holes in it. You can take these 2 bolts, slide them through these 2 holes, come in from the back side of the steering frame. There's this one large hole here, about a 2-inch hole. You want one of your bolts to stick through it, the other one's just going to kind of hang out off the back side. There's your controller up here. Start the bolts in it. Basically, it's just going to sandwich that frame between the controller and this flat plate, and the friction itself will hold it into place. You can explore some different mounting options to see what will work best for you. But you'll use a 10mm wrench or socket and ratchet to get these tightened up to hold this into place. everything lined up before we really start tightening it down. And that's got it held in place, and it's actually really secure like that. It's up and out of the way. And again, you can explore different options if you want to, but this keeps it close enough. That way you can plug in everything from your power steering unit all into one place. You're nice and close. Go ahead and plug it into you with a click. You'll actually hear it and feel it. Make sure you get a good solid connection. And there we go. That's got those. Excess wire, you can always pull it up, tie it off nice and tight with a zip tie. So we've got everything tied in out here. 12-volt accessory, white wire all the way to the left, black wires on our ground post, 12-volt hot that's tied in with our batteries over here to the right. You're going to see here we've got on our steering support bracket, we've got our box mounted, our control module. Everything's plugged in nice and tight on that. Make sure all the plug-ins go in good and nice and tight. They're going to click, you're going to feel it and hear it as they go in. We've also got our power steering unit mounted up. Everything's mounted solid to the base, mounted up again using the 4 original mounting points. One other thing is this has a 3/4 inch by 36 spline shaft up here, and that's going to be the same as a lot of automotive applications. So it's going to open a lot of doors for opportunities with steering quickeners, things like that. Make them easier, more accessible. You can buy the U-joints to adapt it down quicker. It's actually something we're planning on doing on our own here eventually, but we're going to go ahead and put the steering shafts that come with it in right now. That way everyone can see what's going on. Okay, now we have the steering assembly mounted. We're going to put in our top shaft and also our steering column, our tilt bracket. We'll start off by, we remove the bolt from the top steering shaft. Just going to slide it onto the splines. There we go. Then we can slide the assembly up in here. Reuse our stock hardware up here on the top of the tilt assembly. Hold it in place. And we use our bolt that came with the power steering unit to put back through here and tighten it down. Just be sure and go ahead and snug this back down on that yoke. That way you don't forget about it. Alright, let's get our upper steering shaft installed. Tighten up the two 15mm bolts that hold the tilt column on up here. And that's got this upper section finished and ready for the steering wheel. Okay, so we got our steering shaft is installed. As you can see, one of the bolts that goes to the yoke is hitting on the bottom of where our tilt cylinder mounts. So what we're going to do, move around to our bracket where it was a 2-piece bracket. You can see we've already got a ratchet wrench back there on one of those bolts. Those holes were elongated. It's kind of hard to get a good picture of it there. We showed it when we were installing the bracket and bolting it together. And we're going to loosen these 4 bolts up and slide our power steering assembly all the way to the passenger side, and that should move that away just enough to clear that. Okay, so we loosened up our brackets not only on top where the 2 mounts for the power steering harness go together, but also the ones where it mounts around the brake pedal. We had some adjustment there as well. We were able to move it over. Gave us plenty of clearance between that bolt and that bracket. So if you run into a similar issue, you'll know you can start from there and adjust it and get it cleared up and out of the way. Right, we're going to pull the drive shaft down through the firewall. I've already took the bolt out, so we're just going to leave that out for right now. Line it up with our rack. Let it slide all the way down against the rack right now. We're going to leave it like this and leave the bolt out. That way we can go on the inside and get the upper end of the steering shaft on, get it mounted up properly. Then we'll get everything in position and tighten it all down. So here's our shaft coming out of our steering unit, the upper U-joint on the lower steering shaft. You're going to notice we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take this bolt out, Trying to see if I can stay out of the way of the camera. I'm going to take this bolt completely out. Side loose with the bolt out of it so it can slide all the way down against that rack. And then you'll notice that this has some movement in it. That way we can adjust it. We're going to slide this on our shaft. Now we'll slide it up onto the shaft. Alright, now we've got everything in place. We're going to make sure that we've got everything lined up. We'll put our bolts back in, hold our joint together. We're going to tighten this one up on the slide and make sure that we tighten that one up on the bottom. And once you get that done, we're ready to put our cover back on. It's going to use those 2 Torx bolts. If we get the cover on, you may have to trim your cover. So now we've got our lower steering shaft on, the upper steering shaft's on. Everything's tightened down. We've got the steering wheel straight. The rack is centered as well as possible. We can do some adjustments if need be. We're ready to put the cover back on. You're going to notice this cover is not going to fit with this larger power steering unit. So you're going to need to just trim this off in this area on the end of your cover, just so it'll clear. So I feel confident going into the 2020 race season. We're not going to have any steering issues. Now we've got our Demon Powersports brushless power steering unit installed. We've been running their extreme duty axles for quite some time now. 0 issues. They've been performing great. They have several axles designs available for several different riding styles and different budgets. They also have heavy duty ball joints. They have replacement prop shafts and a few other parts. Be sure and check out demonpowersports.com. Find them on Facebook. Follow us on Facebook at Spicer Racing. We try to keep you up to date on their parts and what they have available. Do some reviews and then do some long-term reviews as we get some miles on some product. And again, we want to thank Demon Powersports for all their support in our race program.